Welcome to the next video in the horror style series. What you've actually seen is making the environment look lively with a number of different assets that the Unity store provides and basic Unity terrain tools and the ways to develop it. Now we're actually going to start making it a little bit easier to actually put some scripting in to make the game start working for us. So as you can see, just quickly, I've now finished off my cave system. Making it look all pretty, if you will. And I also have in my cave system a door. Now this door here will be the one where the player enters and leaves. So just before I move on out of this scene, there's going to be two things that I do. The very first one is the first person controller, sorry. We don't actually need that at the moment in that spot. What we want to do is we want to trick the game into thinking that we want to place our player right here. So what I'm going to do is just grab him and just place my player as close to the door as I want to. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate him around just so he's facing the right way. And if you want, you can even hit play. Just a play test that you're going to start right near that door. Now the other thing you'll notice is my cave is quite bright. That's just as I've been designing for designing purposes, just to see how my cave system looks. It does look a little bit creepy when I turn the lights down, but we can go through that. The other thing you might notice if you haven't done it already is the error that you get. There are two audio listeners in the scene. If you ever get that error message, it usually is because you've used a first-person controller and you have two cameras and they both have a component audio listener. Now that is used for the 3D scene. I don't actually require that main camera. That main camera is part of the first controller, so I'm going to delete the one I do not use, or do not need, sorry, just by selecting it and pressing delete. The final thing that I need to do in this scene before I swap over is to actually come into the cave system. I actually have to add it as part of my build. And this is actually what we've done in the past of building our game, but because we're going to have multiple scenes, we need to make sure every scene is added. The easiest way to do that is with the scene open, go to File, Build Settings, and for the moment, just hit Add Current. And you'll actually see that that comes up as Cave Scene. There, we will come back to that and explain it in a moment. So now that I've done that, I don't need to build the game at the moment. I'm just going to hit Close and open up my other scene called Horror Scene. And I'm going to save changes. The next thing is you'll notice that we've now opened up our caves, our environment scene. I haven't added any trees yet because it's easier to add them later. And you'll see that I have my cave entrance door right here. And that's exactly where I want it. You'll also see that I've cleaned up the hierarchy properly as well, which you should have already done. So the very first thing that we're actually going to do is we're going to create a script. And what's going to happen is our character is going to be able to walk around and look at that door. And when they look at the door, it's going to recognize that it's an entrance to a cave. And then it's going to give the player an option to press a key to actually enter the cave system. Once it enters the cave system, it's going to load that cave level. So to do that, it's going to take a little bit of scripting. So the very first thing I'm going to do is in my assets folder, I'm going to right button click and go create folder. And I'm just going to call this one scripts. Inside that folder, we're going to create a JavaScript file and not called it new behavior. We should always rename them so they make sense. In this case, what I'm going to call it is I'm actually going to call it aiming ray. Now, that doesn't say cave entrance or anything like that. It's the process that we're going to be using. So we're actually going to be using a raycast system to check to see if the door is in front of us. If that's still confusing, that's fine. We will get to it later on. So I'll just clear my errors out from the previous scene. So one of the things now that we've actually created that JavaScript file, let's actually open it up and let's just get started with this. So once it's open, the very first thing that we're going to do is I'm just going to delete everything that's there and start by writing an update function and placing my curly brackets in. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually define a couple of variables. The very first variable I'm going to need is an actual ray variable to hold my ray information. And you can see that there is, I'm just going to call it my ray, just to call it something relevant. I could use the word ray, which is what most people do. However, that does get confusing for me. I don't know about yourselves, but my ray just makes sense because it's the one that I've created, the one I'm using. The other thing I'm going to need is a var hit, and hit is just a component of raycast hit. So it is just that variable taking the information or the type of raycast hit. It's very similar to when we have things along the lines of var score is an int. You have your variable name and the type it is. Again here, variable name and the type it is. So that's actually a type is raycast hit, and same with ray. What we want to do is, let's just take a bit of a logical step here. When I'm playing my game, what I'm actually going to be looking at as I'm playing around is the dead center of my screen. So if I was just to pause that now, it would go back. And if I was to quickly go into my first person controller and extend my main camera, you'll actually see that that's my camera preview. It's the exact same that what my game scene sees. So for me to be looking at something directly, I would want to be in the dead center of that screen. Now to do that, I need to use a specific type of code to go screen point to ray to make it come from the center of the camera to that point. Well, that point is the center of the camera, sorry. So to do that, we have our camera is a main camera in the tag. So we're going to make our ray equal, and bear with me if you're currently lost, camera dot main, and that dot main refers to this main camera tag here. That's an inbuilt tag for Unity. Dot screen point to ray. Now what this screen point to ray is, I will just bring it up for you, is screen point to ray returns a ray going from the camera through a screen point, and that screen point is in 2D space. Now that ray is placed into world space because it does need to be in that world space. It starts on the XY position of the screen, or the pixel coordinate, sorry, and they ignore the position Z, or we have to state it as 0, which is why it's a vector 3, because it has to exist somewhere in that 3D space. So we could just keep on going through, and we could copy this vector 3, 200, 200, 200, which will work for us. So I'm just going to copy that last section because I've already got this camera.screenpoint.ray. Let's copy that whole line there. So you can see that I've already got my camera screen point to ray, and again that main just refers to that specific tag. So let's get rid of that first part. The next part is vector 3. Now that vector 3, a good habit is to always create a new vector 3. And we don't want it to spawn at 200, 200 because that could change depending on the size of the player's screen. We want to see it, as we said before, the dead center of that view. So to do that, we've done this many times before and you'll do it many times again, is screen.width, so the width of the screen, and dividing by 2 finds that dead center of your screen. The next one will be screen.height divided by 2, and our Z value will still be 0 because it is ignored. Now why do I put things in brackets? I don't need to in this case, in regards to the screen.height. It's just a form of habit and it makes it look easier to read for myself. But you can remove those brackets if you wish. So what that screen.width is going to do is my X position, which is the one going left and right, and it's going to find that dead center of the screen. And that screen.height divided by 2 is going to find the height and then divide that number by 2, putting us in the dead center of the screen. The next thing that we're going to do is, well, we don't need that var score, that was for explanation. Okay, so that's where my code currently looks and sits like. So the very next thing that I'm going to do is they actually gave us another example of a debug.drawArray. And that debug.drawArray, I'm just going to copy that example and paste it over, is very similar to the debug.log. And what the debug.log was this debug didn't actually show the player anything, but whenever we use the debug.log and then said something like, this is a test message, what ended up happening was that message appeared in Unity, ignoring the red ones at the moment. When we played, it would give us a message in this Unity console. It can't be seen by the player, but it can be seen by the developer. So, coming back to this, we're not going to be doing a log message, we're actually going to be drawing a ray. So I'm just going to comment that one out for the moment, so it won't run. And just to make it match, as I said, the example says ray, but I actually haven't used that variable ray, I'm using my ray. It helps out with understanding how this works, and it's not shooting a ray off at each time. My ray.direction, and I'm actually not going to multiply it by 10 because I know what I want it to set to. And color.yellow is fine. And you'll notice that if you are from Australia or anywhere else that spells color differently with a U, it is, again, in American spelling, it is a very common error that people make. Always make sure that you're spelling it C-O-L-O-R when you're dealing with color. So let's actually just save that and see what messages we get. We did have a couple before, and those two are gone because I didn't finish off that example. So if I was to unclick play, because I forgot to, just double check my script's been saved and it's being compiled, and let's hit play and let's find out what happens. So currently nothing else really looks different, except if I press Control, Shift and P, that'll actually pause the game. And you'll actually see, if I zoom down in on my player, absolutely nothing. And the reason for it is because we haven't actually applied our script yet. So again, this is something that you do always seem to forget every now and again, and this is the best example for it. So just to apply the script, we can just drag and drop it onto the first person controller, not the main camera, but the first person controller is what we're dragging it onto. So now if we take it out of pause mode as well, let's try that again. So outside of pause mode, so I don't lose my changes, aiming ray is attached to the first person controller script, hit play. Now that it's in the game again, I can zoom in, Control Shift P to pause the game, and you'll now see that there is a yellow line being thrown out, and that's the direction of the line. And if you carefully look, it's that dead center section of that screen that we actually see, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so now we have a situation. We don't need this debug.log, so I can get rid of it. We now have a situation where this debug.drawArray, and the question is do we see it in the game? And you probably would have already noticed this, where in the game view, you don't see that yellow line. Where in the scene view, you do, right in front of the player. The reason why they don't see it is it's only available in the scene view, it's only available to the developer of the game. So I'm just going to unplay that one now. Okay, so now that we've got this debug.drawArray, it does usually help us. So this, let's just comment this one. And to comment just means that the computer's not going to run it, but it helps us find out what it is. Going to do later. Draws. So we know what direction the ray is traveling in. And we're going to just comment up our code a bit better of defining variables. So these are defining the variables that we require This first one is obviously defining the ray, and that's obviously defining when it gets hit, which we're about to use. So how do we actually check to see if the ray has hit anything? Well, we could jump into the scripting reference, or we can go straight into it because I can help you out. So the actual command that we're going to use is if physics.raycast. And I'm going to start it off with myRay, which is the variable myRay, hit, and then 100. So what does that actually mean? So the very first part for a raycast, you brought it up in the scripting reference. It says you need a raycast hit, and a range. So how far is that ray going to go? You don't want it to go too far. If you set it up to be 1,000, it's going to cost you memory. And to be honest, even 100 is probably too big, but I'm just making sure that it works for today in this video. So what we've got is just put in our curly brackets, and let's actually type in our next line. So we actually have to check to see if it hits something. And what we're also going to do is let's just try, let's see what happens. So if we've actually got a simple if physics raycast myRay hit 100, we can actually come up with test message. All right, let's save that, go back to Unity, and you'll actually see that I've come up with a couple of errors. Okay, so 11 and 9. And you'll see that that error message is coming up. If you actually take a few moments, you'll actually see that my brackets don't have a matching pair. So those two match up, but I don't have anything matching that one. So that's why it's throwing me that error. Place the end bracket, save it, go back to Unity, and that'll clear both of those off. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to go through and hit play, and let's see what happens. If I'm looking at the sky, I'm just going to bring up my console window just so you can see what's happening. Okay, so you can actually see when I'm looking at the sky, nothing happens, those test messages don't happen, but as soon as I start moving around, I don't know how well you can see it, you can actually see that those messages are going up as soon as I'm looking at something. But as soon as I move up into the sky, it's not hitting anything. But as soon as I'm looking at something within that range, you can see that number increasing again. So that means it's working. But I don't want everything to be working in that way. I don't want everything to work to give me a message saying press E to open the door. I only want that actual door to be that. So I've got this module 22 underscore doors, and it's not tagged. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to create a tag called entrance. And then I'm going to, in my code, if it hits something, so I know that it's actually working now, so I can comment that one out. So that means that code won't actually run. And I'm actually going to go through and check to see if the tag is entrance. Now, if it is that tag, if it is, then execute code. Now, I know this video is getting quite long. We're almost there, so bear with me. So back in Unity, under our tag section, we actually have this tag untagged. Let's just click on the drop-down box, and you can't actually see the word entrance there. But that's all right, Unity's thought of it for us. We can click on Add Tag. You'll see a number of different sections. You need to expand the tags section, and you can see I've already added the word collectible. I'm now going to add entrance. And you'll see as soon as I start adding that, they'll give you another option if you wanted to add more. Now that I've done that, I'll click back on my door system, and you'll see that even though I selected the tag, it's come up untagged, but you'll now, when you click it, you'll see entrance has now been added. So you can actually select that, and module 22 doors has entrance. The next one there is for rocks, and you'll actually see that all those are untagged around it. So what next? Well, that one's actually quite simple. So to actually go through and check to see if something has a tag, with raycasting, we go if hit, so the item that was hit, dot collider dot game object dot tag is equal to, and we have the double equals because it's checking. If we want to set something, we use a single equals. If we're checking something, we use double equals, equals entrance. Now it's in quotations because it is a string, it is text. Close my bracket, open and close my curlies, and I'm just going to place in debug.log. I am looking at the cave entrance. Okay, so that means there should only be one message because this one is disabled. It is commented out, so that code won't run. But this debug.log here, I am looking at the cave entrance, should only appear when I'm looking at that door. And you can actually see that the collider that I have goes all around, so I should be able to get it even if it is in one of those gaps. So I'm going to go back, save my script, go back to Unity, make sure it actually compiles properly. Alright, hit play. And what have we got there? So let's just hit play and find out what this error message is. So it's under my first person controller. It says object reference not set to an instance of an object. So let's bring up our script. What have I actually missed? My auto correction hasn't actually worked for me, so I've missed that. Should be just hit. So just be careful with that auto. Let's go clear. Let's try that again. Okay. So you'll see that it's only come up twice because I accidentally looked over the door. But as soon as I start to look at the door, it starts going through and spamming those messages again. But as soon as I look away, it stops. Exactly what we're after. The only thing that it did do that I wasn't quite happy with was the range. It actually looked at it even when I first started. So I'm all the way over here. If I line it up properly, I'll get that message. So it's a little bit too close. To fix that, this range that I've used here, I'm actually going to create a variable called ray range. And instead of using the word 100, I'm going to go up the top and go var ray range, exactly the same spelling, and define it as an integer. And I'm just going to comment it out and say this variable is for the range of the ray. So instead of actually typing in 100 here, I'm going to be grabbing the variable from here. I'm going to set the default to 100. Now, because I want this ray to be a public variable, so to be accessed by the player, I want to be able to press Control V and place it up the top of those there. That means that these variables here would only be used within this function. I need it to be outside the function for that to be public. So now that I go back, you'll actually see that my errors will clear and this ray range has come in, and I can change that as I need to. So I can cut that down to, let's just say 20 and go from there. So now that I've actually got this going through, it checks to see if a tag is there. So it checks that door for that entrance. And what we're going to do is in the next video, we're actually going to give that user feedback. Because it's only appearing in the console, we need to see that feedback on the player's screen. In the meantime, keep on playing around with your environment, get it right, and we'll see you on the other side of the video.